We'll start with Dr. Wood, your first 2 minutes.
Yeah, Shabir, you've been presenting some theories of some scholars. So let's say that Acts was written around 115 AD. Now that is, of course, by the sort of next generation of the Jesus seminar that put forth that theory. And the vast majority of scholars would put Acts much earlier. And so you're going with the most critical scholars you can find when it comes to the book of Acts. And I'm wondering if these scholars who are putting forward various skeptical theories and looking for evolutions and so on, how would they think of Jesus as portrayed in the Quran and whether the Quran is an embellishment? So the birth narrative of Jesus, we know that this goes back to the Arabic infancy gospel, and it gets changed in the Quran. We find all kinds of stories that we can find earlier. Dul Qarnayn, finding the place where the sun sets. We know where this comes from. It comes from the Alexander romances and the glorious deeds of Alexander. The sleepers in the cave who sleep for 300 years and wake up. We know where this story comes from. It goes back to Bishop Stephen of Ephesus. And so if Muhammad is repeatedly accused over and over and over again in the Quran of plagiarizing other sources, so we know this is an accusation in his time, and people are pointing at him saying, you're copying these tales of the ancients over and over. It's tales of the ancients. You're copying fables of the men of old. When you're talking about Jesus, when you're talking about the stories of Mary, we know where these stories come from. We have actual documents. The question is, how do you think the same kinds of scholars, like the Jesus Seminar, if they were to go to the Quran and evaluate its contents on historical matters, do you think they'd accept them, or do you think they would say this is obviously not historical?
Well, I would start by saying that these are skeptical and critical scholars, and they're skeptical of all faiths, not only of Christianity, but of Islam and of other religions as well. They tend to treat these religions as made up by human beings for good reasons, perhaps. So I wouldn't expect them to say that the Quran is the word of God and the Quranic narrative is true. In any case, I do not regard the Quranic narrative as a historical description of what has happened in the past. The Quranic narrative has a very important purpose of drawing lessons from literature and from history. So when the Quran speaks about events or what is known from previous literature, the Quran is telling people, think about this story, think about what you know about this, and then what should you conclude from that? And it's the Quranic conclusion that is being driven home. What is important in our dialogue tonight is to recognize that the scholars that we're referring to here are actually scholars who are steeped in Christian studies. They have studied the Bible in detail, and they're mentioning this. So previously I mentioned Marcus Borg. Well, Marcus Borg is one of those who say that the Acts of the Apostles was written in the 2nd century. And that places the Acts of the Apostles late. And there are other scholars, and many scholars who have actually put their heads together. The Jesus Seminar has actually produced a book on this entitled Acts and Christian Beginnings after they have deliberated over this, just as they have put out a book on what were the actual sayings of Jesus and the Acts of Jesus, a book that you have cited in the article that you wrote. So these are the scholars. Some of them may now be agnostics. Some of them may even be atheists, maybe closet atheists. But nonetheless, they start with a Christian understanding, and they see all of the problems, and now they come back with agnosticism and atheism.
In case the audience doesn't know about the Jesus Seminar, you have conservative scholars, you have liberal scholars, you have scholars of all kinds of different theological backgrounds. Just to give you an idea, if this were a political spectrum and not a theological spectrum, the Jesus Seminar would be so far to the left they would be neo-Nazis. Now, I'm not saying they're neo-Nazis, they're some very nice gentlemen. I'm saying that that's how far off the level, off the spectrum they are. And when you go to these kinds of scholars to get your view of Acts and then ignore Someone people I would say are much more centered. So for instance, A.N. Sherwin White said, for Acts, the confirmation of historicity is overwhelming. Any attempt to reject its basic historicity, even in matters of detail, must now appear absurd. Roman historians have long taken it for granted. So why would we go with the most extreme view of Acts we can find? And notice, I didn't appeal to Acts. I appealed to much earlier material. So if this is our approach, think about what we're doing here. If you're going to the most radical skeptics you can find, like the Jesus Seminar, to get your view of the text, if you applied that same level, the same types of people to the Muslim sources, and we have people like this. Muhammad Sven Kalish was a Muslim scholar in Germany. He noticed that the methods he was applying to the Bible, he wasn't applying to the Muslim sources. He decided to apply that method to the Muslim sources, and he walked away and said, Muhammad probably never existed. I don't agree with him, but that's what happens when you apply these methods to Muslim sources.
Yeah, and so I have